Welcome to the Verum Epiphania podcast, a serialized reading of the audiobook Verum Epiphania. Episode 3. Chapter 8. The Minstrel, the Dove, and the Shepherd's Crook. Before long he found himself travelling along a sheer-sided ridge. To his right, a straight rock wall rose high above him. To his left, the ground dropped sharply below. The only sound Stefan had heard since leaving the church's ruins was the sled's runners scraping over the snow. But now, very faint and distant at first, another sound drifted in and out of his perception. It sounded sad at first, like someone crying. Then it was like a mesmerizing song, but the words and tune were strange to him. He listened, enchanted as he went along. Then the song ended, and the crying resumed. A few moments later, the ground suddenly levelled beneath Stefan's feet as he entered another clearing. He was deeply troubled when he saw at the centre of the clearing an old woman dressed in a simple frock, sitting on a stone. Her hands covered her face as she wept. Behind her was a low stone hut with a thatched roof. On a rise behind the hut were the ruins of an ancient Ionic temple, its toppled columns choked with vines and draped in snow. Stefan remembered hearing grumblings about the decaying temple from the townspeople. They were angered that the barons had paid to move the stately ruin from its Mediterranean home. The villagers called it the Baron's Folly, and now Stefan understood why. It served no ritualistic purpose here that he could see, and nature was slowly erasing it from existence. The weeping woman had yet to notice Stefan. Not wanting to startle her, Stefan called out in a soft voice, "Merry Christmas!" as he approached to announce himself. The woman stopped crying and uncovered her careworn face. When she saw Stefan, she instantly brightened. She wiped her eyes and said in a pleasing voice, "Merry Christmas, my child. Please forgive an old woman who has allowed despair to consume her." "Why are you crying?" Stefan asked. "I live here alone. Early this morning, my messenger Dove, who brings notes of tidings to and from my son who lives in the village, was attacked by one of the castle's hunting falcons as she was returning. She managed to escape its talons, but I fear she is injured. She took shelter in a nook high up on the rock wall." The woman pointed to the sheer cliff face behind Stefan. "I tried singing to draw her out, but to no avail. My dove was bringing me news of my granddaughter's illness. There are rumours of a pestilence where they live, and also news as to whether or not we might gather this sombre Christmas at their home." Stefan's heart fell at hearing this. He wanted to help and was feeling very brave and clever after helping both the herdsman and the knight, and so it was in this spirit of helpfulness that, without a thought to his own safety, said, "I will find your dove and bring her back." The woman smiled at Stefan and shook her head. "Thank you, my child, but no, it is far too dangerous. She might yet return when she feels it is safe." "But the falcons might be waiting," Stefan said, undeterred. "And you should know about your granddaughter and your family's Christmas plans." "I will be careful." Unheeding the woman's persistent pleas, Stefan left his sled at the side of the path and confidently approached the sheer cliff. Here and there he could see where snow had collected on a series of jagged ledges, revealing what looked to him to be a straightforward path of hand and footholds up the rock wall. He found solid purchases with his hands and feet, whispered a brief prayer, and slowly began his ascent. "Do be careful," the woman called out behind him, then bowed her head in silent prayer. Very soon Stefan realized his chosen path was much more treacherous than he had guessed. The cold, sharp stone bit through his mittens and boots like nails. Several times he slipped and had to stretch and strain his limbs to their limits to find a better hold, but he pressed on doggedly, and soon the ground fell steadily away beneath him. At last, when he was very high up on the wall, Stefan reached a nook with feathers clinging to its jagged opening. He strained to see inside. The winter sun was high enough now that it shone deep inside the crevice. At the very back, illuminated in a shaft of cold light, Stefan saw the trembling dove. He reached inside, gently grasped it, then carefully tucked the tiny burden inside his coat. He began his descent. Again, many in Stefan's place would have found it difficult to focus on anything but the precariousness of their situation. But to the boy, Still absorbed in the charitable role of Father Christmas, he was thinking that this must be what St. Nick felt like as he climbed down chimneys to deliver presents. When at last he reached the ground, he presented the dove to the woman with a flourish. Overcome with joy, she cradled the dove gently against her bosom and thanked Stefan profusely. "What a blessing it is to meet such a kind and brave young boy," she said. "Now come inside, where we can have something warm to drink and hear the tidings from my son." Inside the hut was a dirt floor covered with clean straw. A small fire burned in a brick oven, its smoke curled up through a small hole in the roof. The woman unfastened the note from the dove's breast, then set her messenger on a windowsill perch. She handed the note to Stefan, motioned for him to sit at a rough table, and fetched a kettle from on top of the oven. "Could you read it to me while I fix us a drink?" The note was a thick folded parchment, bound with twine, and held together by red wax stamped with the seal of a signet ring. Stefan was surprised to see the seal was almost identical to the knight's heraldry. He broke the seal, unfolded the parchment, and began to read. "My dearest mother, I will arrive at your door early this Christmas Eve to fetch you, for your help is desperately needed to help decorate the Christmas tree with sugared fruit. Your granddaughter has made a miraculous recovery, just in time for Christmas. Therefore, we plan to celebrate the birth of the Christ child with much merrymaking and festivity. Then, if it pleases you, stay with us through 12th night, and then, if you find that is agreeable, forever." Upon hearing this news from her son, the woman was overcome with emotion and burst into fresh tears. When she had recovered, she breathed a heavy sigh of relief and said a prayer of thanks. Then she carried 2 fragrant, steaming draughts to the table where she sat and talked familiarly with Stefan. "It is the miracle I had prayed for," she told him. "But still, I hadn't thought I would actually get to spend Christmas with my family. Because of this, I hadn't baked my usual contribution to our festivities, a 3 Kings cake. Now, because of my doubts," she lamented, "I have nothing to give my family for Christmas." Stefan looked thoughtful. "What is a 3 Kings cake?" he asked with great interest. The boy was eager to learn yet again that day something new about Christmas, and a plan was forming in his mind. He listened attentively as the woman explained. "A 3 Kings cake is a round cake that symbolizes the circuitous route the Magi took to reach the Christ child." The Magi again, Stefan thought, and he wondered at how it was that the orbits of the Magi and cakes should repeatedly cross his path that day. "The Magi," the woman went on, "took this roundabout way to confuse King Herod, who had followed them so he could kill the Christ child. I bake an alabaster figure of a dove to represent the Christ child into the cake. The grandchild who finds the dove in their piece of cake gets to open the first present on Christmas morning." "What a wonderful tradition," Stefan said, then quickly added, "While I don't have a 3 Kings cake, I do have something else your family might enjoy." Then Stefan ducked outside and returned a moment later with 2 parcels. He rejoined the woman at the table, where he triumphantly presented the packages to her. "These are baklava and a Christmas stolen from the village bakery. Please take them for your family's Christmas." The woman's eyes shone as she looked at Stefan with wonder. "Thanks to you, my child, and to God. It is yet another miracle in a day filled with them. How is it that such a fine boy is travelling by my home on Christmas Eve morning, pulling a sled filled with pastries?" The question might have been rhetorical, but Stefan was only too happy to tell her. "I am delivering packages to the castle for their Christmas celebration. These 2 packages were—" here he paused briefly as he searched for the appropriate words, "extras from the bakery." The woman's eyes dazzled. "You are going to the castle. I was once a minstrel there." "I heard you singing earlier," the boy said. "It was very beautiful, but I didn't recognize the song." "It's called The Holly and the Ivy. It was a Christmas-time favorite at the castle." She clasped her hands and closed her eyes, remembering. Oh, how they celebrate Christmas at the castle. Sumptuous feasts, singing, dancing, ice skating on the frozen moat, and snowball fights, all are the order of the day. And jousting? Stefan asked, remembering the knight's words. Yes, and jousting too, and sword play and archery, and less physical contests like chess and backgammon and knucklebones. Knucklebones? Stefan asked. It is a jack-like game, the woman explained, with pieces made from sheep bones, which reminds me. The minstrel rose from the table and walked to a dim corner of the hut. She returned a moment later carrying a wooden shepherd's staff with a crook at the top. No traveller should be without a walking stick, she told the boy. I have several. This is a genuine shepherd's crook from the Holy Land. It belonged to a distant relative and has been in my family for generations. Please, take it in return for your kindness. Stefan told her he couldn't accept such a priceless family heirloom, but when the woman insisted, saying he understood the responsibility and significance it symbolized, the boy accepted it gratefully. When they had finished their drinks, Stefan said, with genuine regret because he had greatly enjoyed his visit, that he must be going. Outside, he reorganized the 3 remaining parcels in his sled. Then he took up the shepherd's crook with one hand and the sled's handle with the other. As he did this, the minstrel said in a clear voice, a prayer, from her doorway. O good shepherd, who guided the Magi by the light of a star to thy sacred cradle, guide all men who are walking in their own errors with the desire of knowing thee. Amen. Amen, Stefan echoed. Then they parted with best wishes for a Merry Christmas, and Stefan set off once more for the castle. The minstrel's gift and her tales of glorious Christmases at the castle had stirred Stefan's heart and imagination. Inspired by these thoughts, plus the good feeling one gets when forgetting oneself for the sake of others, Stefan fairly flew up the trail with his sled. Chapter 9. The Castle. The sun had reached its zenith and would soon begin its westward descent. The path had grown steeper as it wound higher through the pine woods. Presently, Stefan arrived at an exposed precipice open to the sky. A knife-edged wind seeming to issue from the now nigh-on summit threatened to sweep him off the mountain. But even though the vexing gale stung his face and pulled at his clothes, Stefan was undeterred. His heart still brimmed with the spirit of Christmas. Plus, he had discovered he could use the shepherd's crook for balance and traction in the snow, and he could lean heavily on it against the wind. He pressed on in this fashion until the perilous path wound once more into a forested thicket. The sheltering protection of the trees blocked the hissing wind, and now Stefan could hear what sounded like an echoing axe blow rolling down the mountainside. He paused to listen and heard it again. This time, out of the corner of his eye, he also saw a towering tree near the mountain's summit shudder and shake loose its mantle of snow. Stefan's heart leapt. He naturally thought that since the barons already had mountains of coal, he must be witnessing the felling of the castle's Christmas tree. He could picture the majestic tree standing proudly in the castle's great hall, ornamented with glittering silver and gold baubles. He watched as the mighty tree staggered under repeating axe blows, then finally toppled out of view. And following that, to Stefan's even greater delight, what peeked out from behind the felled tree made his heart soar. It was a turret. The castle was in sight. Anticipation and excitement engulfed him, and he shot up the trail. And then, as he drew closer to the summit, it began to snow. Great white flakes filled the air around him. How he again wished his mother could be here to see the snow. In another moment, the trees thinned raggedly. The forest ended abruptly, and he emerged onto an open expanse of terraced courtyard. Here the biting wind rose up again, but Stefan hardly noticed. The boy was aware of only one thing at that moment. Looming directly ahead of him, hewn into the mountain's massive crags and crowning the summit, was the magnificent castle. Stefan was awestruck at seeing the imposing fortress. With its multitude of towers and turrets soaring high above a battlemented wall, it was more spectacular than he had imagined. A long moment passed as he stood still in the swirling snow, marveling at the ancient stronghold. It was only with a deliberate effort that he moved to pull his sled. When he did, it ground to a jarring halt. It was then Stefan realized he was standing on frozen, trampled grass. All the snow had been cleared from the courtyard. Gouges in the brown turf revealed where spades had been used to scrape the snow away. These marks were overlaid with longer grooves, fringed with splinters and pine needles, where the trunks of mighty trees had been dragged towards the castle. From these signs, it became plain to Stefan that not just one, but an entire forest of Christmas trees must be standing inside the castle. Fairly bursting with anticipation, Stefan quickly made his sled back into a wagon. Then he pulled it with all speed along a flagstone ramp that cut through the courtyard and ended at a massive drawbridge. Looking down into the stone channel spanned by the bridge, he could see that its frozen waters had been etched into a grid and sawn into blocks of ice. It appeared there would be no ice skating in the moat this year. As he crossed over the bridge, his eyes and nose began to burn as a cloud of acrid smoke engulfed him. As he rubbed at his eyes, he realized the snow pelting him from the sky wasn't snow at all, but ash. And then he heard and also felt, in his chest, a deep rumbling emanating from somewhere deep inside the castle. It was as if, Stefan thought, as he coughed and sputtered his way through the cloying reek, the ancient citadel had been beset by a great dragon. Stefan passed into the deep shadow of the castle's walls and arrived at the barbican. Beneath its double towers was a massive arched portcullis of iron and wood. Stefan was wondering if he should knock when the heavy gate began to creak and groan. It rose slowly to reveal a burly sentry dressed in rich silver and gold livery. "Merry Christmas!" Stefan called out. The guard looked the boy up and down for a moment before challenging him with, "And you would be?" But before Stefan could answer, the sentry jested, "Little Bo Peep?" and laughed uproariously. "I have a delivery," the boy returned good-naturedly, "from the baker, the haberdasher, and the lithographer. My arrival was telegraphed." The guard ran a gloved finger down a clipboard. "Right, here it is then. A photograph, hat, and a cake?" "Yes, sir." Stefan stepped aside to show the sentry the 3 parcels in his wagon. "Here they are." The guard waved Stefan inside. "Deliveries go to the keep in the southwest corner. Quick now." Stefan pulled his wagon across the threshold, and the guard disappeared inside a gatehouse. The gate clanked to behind Stefan. He was alone in the stillness of the castle's bailey. Here, too, the snow had been scraped away. In the centre of the bailey was a great marble courtyard filled with fantastic topiary and strange geometric sculptures. But oddly, Stefan could see no trace of holiday decor or the slightest hint of Christmas festivities. There were no jousting galleries or tilt yard, no wreaths hung on the great hall's massive oaken doors, and no garland or greenery to be found anywhere. The castle's only adornments were great crimson banners, emblazoned with the baron's crest, fluttering from the battlements. As Stefan cut across the bailey, he noticed the deep rumbling here was much louder as it resounded inside the castle walls. When he neared the designated keep, he discovered a wooden cross and other ceremonial and ornamental items from a church had been cast aside in a far corner of the castle's wall. Stefan guessed that the rumours the haberdasher and vicar had heard were true. Like the monastery's church, it seemed clear the castle's chapel had fallen victim to the baron's renovations. But curiously, he could see no signs of a new place of worship. Stefan arrived at the keep's door and knocked. In a moment it flew open, and a harried man dressed in the castle's silver and gold livery barked, "Well, what is it then? What have you got?" After Stefan dutifully described the contents of the packages, the servant ordered, "Leave your wagon and bring the parcels." Stefan was elated. He was afraid that once he had delivered the packages, he would be sent away without seeing inside the magnificent fortress. But now he was going inside. Stefan was so eager to get inside that he forgot to put down his shepherd's crook as he scooped up the packages. When he bounded through the door, he was staggered by what he saw. He was standing inside a pantry larger than his family's home. It looked to him like the bakery, butcher's shop, and greengrocer all in one. The rafters were hung with every kind of bird and beast. Pheasants, swans, blackbirds, ducks, pigeons, rabbits, mutton, pork, venison, eels, turtles, and even dolphins. The shelves were lined with bottles and crocks filled with butter, cream, honey, and nuts. There were jars bursting with exotic spices like saffron, vanilla, anise, and candied fruits and peels. Flasks brimmed with colourful juices and oils and extracts. Wheels of cheese were heaped on the counters next to baskets overflowing with apples, onions, potatoes, lemons, and limes. Great bulking sacks of coffee and tea sat on the stone floor next to barrels of beer, wine, mead, and other spirits. Stefan stood gaping, overwhelmed by the plenty. On one wall was a large panel covered with looping wires and cords that Stefan recognized as a telephone switchboard. Its myriad of ports were labelled with important-sounding words, including Laboratorium and Sanctum Sanctorum. The servant connected a cable to the port labelled Laboratorium, pushed a button, and spoke something into a microphone. Then he motioned Stefan over to a table piled with buns, bread, and biscuits. The servant cleared a space on the table and ordered Stefan to set his packages down. Stefan instantly complied, and the servant turned his attention to unpacking the parcels. He carefully brought out the cake lastly. When he did, the servant frowned at it suspiciously. After an interval, he turned to Stefan and said sharply, "Verum Epiphania? What's that supposed to mean?" Stefan, feeling very pleased that he knew the answer, said proudly, "It is Latin and Greek for the true epiphany." "I see," the man said, and then continued with exaggerated politeness. "And would you mind terribly telling me what the true epiphany means?" "Not at all," Stefan answered with great earnestness. "The true Epiphany is a celebration of when the 3 wise men visited the Christ child in Bethlehem and proclaimed him the true Saviour. It is part of the Christmas story in the Bible." "Is that what it means?" boomed a new voice that made Stefan and the servant jump. A tall and stately figure had slipped silently into the room. Stefan looked up and instantly recognized the man from the broadside. It was one of the barons. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Verum Epiphania podcast.